In today's episode, you're going to meet this musician who was in the quintessential musical candy store on Music Row on 48th Street in New York City as a kid, how that influenced his musical journey, the people he met, how he took the bass and discovered all different genres, and how he fell away from music and then came back. Hey, let's check in with John Cardone. All right. John Cardone is a bassist with a diverse musical background spanning multiple genres and styles. His early influences include jazz, fusion, and progressive rock. He was exposed to musicians. It's some weird to say that he was exposed to musicians. He was exposed to influential musicians on 48th Street, which further shaped his style. And with that, I want to welcome John Cardone to the Long Island Sound. Welcome, John. So good to have you, man.
Hey, Steve. How you doing?
Good. So, what you're going to do for me is you're going to educate me tonight. That's your role, all right? But I want to get into this because, I mentioned 48th Street. Our audience might not know Music Row, and from what I recall, you were born in Astoria and found yourself on 48th Street. Tell me about that scene and how that shaped your career as a musician.
Cool. Well, as a young, pup growing up and wanting to play music, you had a couple of music stores in Astoria, which were kind of okay, but a very short train ride, subway ride away was 48th Street in Manhattan, which was between 6th and 7th Avenue. And it was indeed called Music Row. And the first time I went there, I'm sure like anybody else who's ever been there, their first time, it's like one store after the other. It's kind of like the garment district, except for music.
Right.
Different stores. They had stores for brass and woodwind. They had stores for, guitar, keyboards. It was a little bit of everything there. And going in there was just a complete mind-blowing experience because you got to see all these different guitars and all the stores were different. Manny's was the behemoth. Sam Ash was the behemoth who was following and always competing with Manny's. Then you had Alex Music, you had Grayson's, you had We Buy Guitars, which was a really, that was the fun store because you'd never know what was in that window. They would take these guitars, the old man, Larry, that used to own it, would have these guitars in the window, and he would just slam them into the window. You'd hear the guitars banging off the glass. And in the meantime, it's a 1959 gold topless Paul, So that's really how it all started for me. I actually ended up getting a job as a young guy right out of high school as a messenger for United Artists. And
wow.
Yeah, and that office was really cool. It was right around the corner, 725, 7th Avenue. So right between 48th and 49th. It was great. And every day I would go over there after work, during lunch, ended up buying a Rickenbacker bass, which was really like my first one. And it was funny because every day, they said it would take about 3 weeks to come in. So on the 22nd day, I went in there saying, "Is it here yet?" And for those parents with kids that say, "Dad, are we there yet?" It was me saying, "Is it here yet? Is it here yet?" Every single day. And at one point, the owner of the store, Artie Nitka, who God bless him, said to me, "John, do you just want to work here? It might make it easier for you." So I quit the messenger business and I started working on 48th Street.
Wow.
And
wow.
It was a lot of fun. I sold guitars. I was responsible for the effects and guitar strings and all that other stuff. And it was an era where, music was just really exploding at every level. And
what I find so interesting about that story, right? Hey, I've gone into Guitar Center and Sam Ash, which is gone now, basically going to be online. And, we're out in the suburbs here on Long Island. So it's not like there was a mecca at, the Guitar Center in Comac or whatever. But you're in the center of the world.
That is the center
at that time, right? Whether you realize it or not.
Yeah.
And by the way, it's not just Joe Blow that comes in. It's a lot of famous musicians that come in and get their stuff, their instruments repaired and pick out new stuff. And so let me ask you this: as a kid, now working, which store did you work in?
Terminal Music.
Feral Music. Any experiences of running into any real characters there while you worked in the store?
We used to have the guy to come in all the time. The time to make the donuts guy. He would always come in with his dog.
Yeah. Right.
Rip Taylor, the comedian, come in.
Oh, yeah.
And he was a pisser, that guy. He was a lot of fun. He was really good. But we met some really good people there. There were some great stories. I remember calling up Joan one day from work, and I said, Joan, can you hear the clavinet that's being played behind me? And she goes, yeah. And I said, that's Stevie Wonder playing that. So,
you can't get out of here, really?
So, I mean, that was it. We would always run into Danny Hartman. He used to play with Edgar Winter, before he passed away at a very young age. There were a lot of cool players that came in. All the Twisted Sister guys came in early on. When Chic was first out, they would pull in with their Mercedes Benzes across the street, and Nile Rodgers and then would come out. And Terminal, was a smaller store, but it mean that, the big guns weren't walking around, because you would always see them. And as the center of the universe, it really was. We used to have customers that would come in. We had one guy, he worked on a cruise ship, and he would always come in and buy like a ton of stuff and take it back to Germany with him. That's kind of neat. I think my craziest experience ever was these guys came in and asked if we had Martin guitars. And we did. We were like the only Martin dealer on the block at that point in time.
Oh, wow. Wow, big deal.
He was an Asian fellow, and he bought 30 Martin guitars. And the wildest part about this was, while we were bringing them all up from the basement and taking them out, there was a container truck that was parked outside, and there were instruments coming out of every store. It was just these ants or bees going to a hive, pianos and guitars and drum kits. It was a very special time, really special.
Now, I'll look at, because I always look at the glass half full. My assumption would be, is they're going to take them and copy them. Do you think that was the case? Or you don't know?
There may have some of that been going on, but the export business at that time, there's a lot of money to be made by bringing that American stuff overseas. So, yeah.
Right, and I assume Martin would not sell direct. They would always go through their dealers too.
Yeah, pretty much so. I don't know what happened once they walked out the door. So,
wow.
But it was
amazing.
It's just great.
I didn't realize I'd be talking to a kid in a candy shop. But
it was right beyond the candy shop. It really was. And then you'd run into people. We became friendly with Denny Dunaway from Alice Cooper's band, and we got invited to a rehearsal that was at the Academy of Music, actually, for $1 Billion Babies, and it was a band rehearsal. There was nobody in the theater, just us, and we got to experience a lot of stuff like that. The Blue Oyster Cult guys. I mean, I actually signed them after I left 48th Street. I went to work for the Shaw Brothers rep on Long Island here, right next to me in Elmont, and I ended up signing them with the paperwork from Shaw in Evanston, Illinois, to their first endorsement deal, which was really cool. So,
amazing!
That was a lot of fun. It was a great way to go.
All right, so now there's a guy. All right, so you have that musical influence. You're a bass player. From what I recall from other conversations you had, you started out on drums, so that was your influence.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you moved to bass, I would assume, rather quickly. So now the hook, the fish hook, is deeply embedded in your jaw, and you're getting into it. I want to talk about how your style of bass playing changed over time. Tell me about moving from melodic to groove. Kind of talk to me like I'm a total idiot, which most people do.
Yeah.
And explain.
Yeah.
And my wife's not even here. But give me the nuances of that so I can comprehend.
Well, when I first started out, like every young kid, everybody was they wanted to be a Beatle. They wanted to be Paul McCartney in my case. So they wanted to be first, but a drum kit was out of the question. So I became the Paul McCartney, if you will. And my brother tried to play guitar and bass. He really didn't have much of the aptitude for it, or he had things going on, whatever it was. So he ended up having an acoustic guitar that he gave me. It was actually a nylon string guitar that I tried to put bass strings on. And I then learned a very good lesson about, engineering and what steel does.
Physics.
Physics. Yes. So once the neck slapped off the guitar, I figured that's not a good idea. So when I got the invitation Hofner, and I started with that, and I ended up getting I think it was a jazz bass. I got somewhere in Astoria, I think. And that's kind of where
Okay.
and from there, from the Beatles, I got really turned on to Yes. So I became a real Chris Squire fan at that point. So that opened me up to prog. And I spent a lot of time, Yes, King Crimson, Genesis, Emerson, Lake and Palmer,
Or yeah, ELP, yeah.
Giant. I mean, some of the really crazy stuff. And that's what kind of got me going. I mean, I liked the fact that it was a challenge. I liked the fact that it was melodic. And I'll get back to that whole thing later on. But so that took me for a while. And then Weather Report, I got exposed to. And when I first heard Jaco Pastorius, that kind of moved the needle for me a lot because it was kind of the prog stuff, but it had a more funky, aspect to it. And it was just another avenue of great music to go to, following that more complicated genre or their more complicated style. And I tended to gravitate towards that because at that point in time when I was young and dumb, playing more was better, back then.
Right.
So that, so that took me a while to get around, and I did that. And then at one point, and it was right around the time that disco happened, I was playing in a band, really weren't going anywhere. And this guy comes walking into Terminal Music, and with a band called Ethos. And so we started talking, and he basically said that, Ethos, who was opening up for the Strawbs at that point in time.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Player. And I said, well, I play. He goes, well, if you'd like to make a recording, send it over to us. We'd be happy to look at it. So that was a real bellwether moment for me because I had to tell the guys in the band that I'm doing this and they needed their help, right, to help record it.
Right.
And if it worked out, I was going to be leaving. And if it didn't work out, it kind of had me in like an odd spot, but I went for it. And they came back with a very nicely written letter saying, the bass playing knocked them out, but the voice wasn't quite what they were looking for. So that was kind of it. And while all of that was going on, disco was starting to get, more popular. While at Terminal, I got introduced to a lot of different bands that were in the disco world and started to go watch some of that. The music was great. The girls in wedding dresses was also quite interesting, So it wasn't quite CBG, it was a little different. So at that point, I was kind of disillusioned at that point. I remember this guy on 48th Street one day. I don't remember his name, but he was standing out between Terminal and Alex Music, which was right next door. And he's playing this guitar, and he's just, I can't even describe how good this guy was. And apparently Larry Coryell had just parked across the street to go into one of the stores on 48th Street, and he saw this guy playing. And he watched him for a little bit, and he went back into the garage. And he came back about 5 minutes later with a guitar in a case, and he gave it to me. He says, I don't need this guitar, you need this guitar. And oh
my God.
And here was a guy who's basically playing on the street, not busking, just like sitting there.
So, just chilling. Yeah.
Right. So that was kind of the thing that, really kind of didn't matter how good you were at that point in time. If you didn't have the right vehicle to get you where you needed to go, it would be difficult. And that still is to this day.
I agree.
True. Right. So I got disillusioned by it, and I kind of just, I stopped playing. And
really?
Yeah. Went to clubs and, got stupid and that, just, so I sold everything I had. And that was around 1982, 81-ish, I think, in that area. And I stopped. And during that time, at some point in going to 1995 now, so there's 14 years on,
Oh, wow.
I had still been in touch with the music from working for Shure. I was
Right.
I was working for rep companies that were still tied into it with amps or speakers or whatever it was as a manufacturer's rep. So I was starting to get the Jones to play again because at Bayer I was getting introduced to a lot of people,
Right.
like Faith Hill and Tim McGraw. And
Okay.
I'm going to drop a few names here and there, but watching that, it did a lot of things. It exposed me to country music, number one, because Bayer dynamic mics were very popular in the
Okay.
country world, and so I started really getting into it, and but I hadn't really started playing yet. So there was one Christmas Eve where I brought a bunch of microphones to Tanya Tucker, who was
Okay.
playing a NASCAR Christmas party at Roseland, and
Of course.
brought them, worked with the front of house engineer, got all the front line up there, and during a break, I was sitting with the band, and these guys were just normal guys.
Right.
I said to him, "So guys, how did you guys get into country music like this?"
Right.
And they all started laughing, and I'm like, "What?" They went, "John, we're musicians. We play. We're professional musicians. We will play anything that we have to play, and we're going to like."
Right.
And that to me was when the light came on. It really was. It was like, if you want to become a musician, that's one thing. If you want to play for yourself, you could do that too. It's great.
Right.
If you want to play in small circles, that's great. But these guys were pros. They were traveling musicians. They played with this band this week, that band the next week. And that's when I was like, okay, this is an interesting thing. So,
Well, you know what? I'm going to stop you a minute because what I find fascinating is one, you sell everything. You kind of like burning the boat, you're burning the boats. And I got to ask you what it felt like. Like, were you disillusioned because there were so many great players around you that you saw this guy and, hey, you know what? I think one of the diseases a musician or artist has is better than this guy, but I'm not as good as that guy. And when you start doing that comparison, it can be a virus that destroys you.
yeah,
What was it? Was it like that for you?
I think there was a little bit of that. But
Okay.
I think the whole thing about music was changing at that point,
Right.
in
Yeah,
the,
you were on the cusp of that whole
yeah. So, more dance music was happening, the band
DJs.
DJs, all that stuff. So I just kind of was tired, I just got mentally tired of it. And so I extracted myself from it. And,
Okay.
and there I
But
was.
you still had a toe in the water in doing the sales repping
Yes.
thing and that
Yes.
sort of thing.
Yes.
And
So,
the other part of that story, which I find interesting when you're talking to these musicians, and I remember seeing a movie about a band, like an orchestral band on a radio program, like back in the 30s,
mhm.
and it's the same band. And it's like, all right, now we're going to go down to Tijuana. And, it's the same guys playing Mexican music and salsa and stuff.
Yep.
And that's what I equate to what happened to you is you're
Yeah.
a pro.
Yep.
You're a pro. I can give me the sheets. I'll play it and
Well,
maybe
yeah.
I'll explore something different. Hey, John, let's do this. Let's just take a quick break.
Sure.
I want to explore some of your influences, and one in particular that I'm interested in, the Motown guy. So I'll leave that a mystery. And then I also want to talk about what's the difference in different types of basses for different genres. If you can get to that
Sure.
and educate me, that would be great.
Great.
All right.
Okay.
Hey, everybody, we'll be back with the fabulous bassist, John Cardone. Stick with us. There's so much more to come.
The Long Island Sound is here to help you connect with local artists. Follow us on Instagram for the latest up-to-date podcast episodes and also to connect with your local artists and their upcoming shows.
Hey, everybody, we're back with John Cardone. John Cardone is a famous bassist from, I would say, Western Long Island, but who cares? It doesn't matter.
On the border of Queens and Nassau, yeah.
In the border. But you were on the edge of the center of the world, New York City, growing up in Astoria. And you spoke about some of your influences, Chick Corea, Stanley Clarke, Al Di Meola, but I really want to focus in, and I zeroed in on this guy today, James Jamerson, famous, the famous Motown bassist who didn't get credit for like all these different albums he was on until like the late 70s.
Yep.
But tell me about his influence on your music. I mean, all these other guys are phenomenal,
Yeah.
and are unique, have unique styles. Tell me what kind of grabbed it for you.
Well, that's actually a very good story. You know, coming out of all of those different genres, when I started playing again, you know, I had nothing. My wife found a bass for me at MetLife where she used to work, which was a Rickenbacker bass, which, you know, great way to start. It's like the one I used to have. So I started playing again. This was around 95-ish. And shortly thereafter, I had always been a fan of Motown, but not quite as in-depth as I wanted to be. But you got to remember, I'm getting back into playing again. You know, like even, you know, I used to be able to sing and play like King Crimson stuff. It's just now, within the last year and a half to 2 years now, that the singing and playing is starting to come together because those the synapses are starting to be rewired, you know?
Right,
So,
sure. I believe it.
but in one, I was talking to a guy who worked in my company one day, and he goes, you know Jamerson? I said, yeah. He goes, have you ever seen Standing in the Shadows? And I went, I have not. So he said, I'm gonna bring this tape in for you tomorrow, and it's called Standing in the Shadows of Motown. And it's basically the story about the band, you know, with Jamerson and all the other guys not getting, but that introduced me to it. And as I talked about the challenging stuff and everything, you know, the more complicated and harder to play, that much in this big a bag. When I dug into Jamerson, it just blew all of that apart for me because Jamerson is ground zero, you know, is just ground zero. And, you know, many years ago when I first started playing again, I went to a place called the Funky Monkey that used to be, I think, somewhere on the South Shore near Island Park. They used to have a jam there. And there's a bass player on Long Island by the name of George Panos. And George Panos, to me, is one of the greatest players I've ever heard. He's Jocko. And he said something to me that first night, because it was the first time I ever went out after all of this hiatus to actually play again. I was terrified.
Right.
I was terrified.
I can imagine, right? Yeah.
And George said to me, look, every note should sound like a cannon blast. And it took a while for that to sink in, but now I understand what he means by that. So from playing all the complicated stuff, it's been great. It's given me, you know, a lot of ways to move around the neck. But learning to play the simple stuff simply is sometimes harder because playing one note is easy to do, but playing one note right isn't quite the same. So, so that, you know, between James Jamerson and after he died, a guy named Bob Babbitt took over pretty much the ranks for, you know, the Standing in the Shadow of the Motown, the Funk Brothers, if you will, which is the name of it. And then, so this is the Bible, if you will.
Okay.
That's it. Standing in the Shadows.
Standing in the Shadows. All right. Okay.
It's a great book. Good stories about the band. There's a movie about this also. If you haven't seen it, I highly recommend you see it.
Well, you know what I'll do is I'll put a link for like an Amazon link in the description for people who want to check it out.
Yeah.
And by the way, let me just chime in. For anybody who knows John or wants to chime in and comment on the podcast, please do. Please share it and give us your impressions. We'd really like to know. Hey, it's all about music discovery, but it's very important to get feedback from the audience. It helps the show and it helps music discovery. Anyway, I didn't mean to cut you off there.
Yeah. So that's kind of where it was now. And then, you know, certain things, we'll get into the basses and stuff like that, but that's what really flipped me. And when I watch bands play, I do really pay attention to the music and how it's played. When I play, I try to get close to what the original thing is. You know, I don't try to overplay, and I do try to get somewhat close to the sound, whether or not anybody realizes it appreciates it, I don't really care. I mean, that's for me.
Right.
Do that because I want to do that for me. So there you go.
Well, that brings me into one of my favorite bands is Little Feat, and you play in a Little Feat tribute band called Sailing Shoes with who's the guitarist?
Mark Newman.
Mark Newman, who was on this podcast. There'll be a link to Mark. Mark's one of my most popular
Great guy.
episodes. Humble guy, great guy.
Oh, yeah, very.
And I got to tell you a quick Little Feat story. I'll never forget this. My neighbor across the street when I lived in Bethpage, he was 10, 20 years older than me. I was playing it out in my garage, the Little Feat, waiting for Columbus album. And he came running over and he's like, that's my favorite band. And then all of a sudden we had this connection together because,
Yep.
he was the cool neighbor. Anyway, I digress. So let me ask you this. So it's very interesting. I watch bands very closely now as well. I watch the communication between band members. Maybe I have a more critical ear now because I'm listening. Are they playing to the song? Are they showing off? Or are they effing it up or whatever? So I got to ask this. Maybe this is a loaded question. Is when you watch a bass player, I don't care or you pick the genre, what can they do wrong to make it go off the rails?
Well, that is a loaded question.
Sorry, put you on the spot.
Well, music in general, I mean, is really subject to the listener, and it's really subject to the player. So what I may hear as something might not necessarily be the same as what the other player is hearing.
Okay. Fair enough.
How one executes, like we talked about playing the one note like a cannon blast versus slurring notes together or playing them much cleaner. I've tried to get much cleaner in my style, over the years, especially since I started dumbing it down and trying to get more Jamerson-like. So it is a bit of a loaded question. Now, you could take some creative liberties with things like that. It could be very subtle, or they could be crazy, and again, depending on what you want to achieve, right? That will be what works for you. So yeah, it is a bit of a loaded question, but if you're out there playing and you're having fun, at the end of the day, it really doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter. I was just thinking as you were talking, I was listening to you, but I'm thinking about the bass lines, one back to Jamerson really quickly. As I'm reading through the Motown songs, the bass lines are coming to me going, oh yeah, that's that one. And then I was just thinking about some of the sitcoms that are out there that had great, maybe it was Seinfeld had a great whatever bass line. And I'm like, that's the signature of the whole. You hear that bass line, you go, oh yeah, Seinfeld's coming on. So I think
this line in Seinfeld, that's actually a keyboard on that. That's a synthesizer.
Oh, is it?
Yeah. But I believe that Carol Kay does play bass on that, who's another iconic bass.
Oh yeah. Very much. Yeah, so you just popped my bubble. Thanks, John. I appreciate that. Sure.
Yeah. Well, I tell you. So, but yeah.
All right. So tell me this. So, you were talking about what makes a jazz bass one. Have you played upright bass, acoustic upright basses?
Much, as much as I want to. But I plan, when I retire, I'm going to dedicate a lot of time to playing upright.
Yeah, I know. David Noyes from Cadillac Moon plays electric upright.
Right.
It's very, very interesting. Give me kind of a short breakdown of different basses for what genres, if that makes sense.
Well,
for you, I know it's subjective.
Yeah, it is. I mean, I try to go for tone. I try to see, what the best tone is going to be. And like some of my basses, like this guy right here is like a 74 jazz bass. I use this one with the Almost Brothers a lot. It's got round lamb strings when I sit in with them, and it's got a lot of sustain. This guy over here, 1967 Guild Starfire.
Ooh.
Thumpa Thumpa, for all of the more 60s type music. Flat wound strings versus round wound strings. And, I've got a whole bunch of Fenders and stuff like that. So, again, precision basses, Fender P basses are probably the most sought after and go-to basses all the time. Because my hands are a little smaller, I kind of gravitate to the jazz bass, but I do like stretching out on a P bass. I really do. And I have a lot of them. So, I mean, it's a lot of fun with that. But again, I have round wound strings. I only have one active bass. There are a lot of people out there that have active basses, what has electronics built into it. So,
okay, thank you.
Like, the Federas and stuff like that. Matter of fact, I have it up here because I'm going to be in with the Almost Brothers this weekend. This is my
nice.
my PV Cirrus 5-string, which is again something I use a lot of. Got one too many strings on it, but I do love playing it. I just have to be careful, So, but
all right. So now, tell me about. Now I know on an electric guitar, the pickups are very unique. Whether it's a humbucker pickup or this pickup, that pickup. How does that work for the bass?
That's a very good question. The pickups, let's say, on that Guild Starfire that I just showed you, if I may.
Yep. Yeah, please.
These are Hackstrom pickups. I believe Hackstrom bipolar. These are really phenomenal sounding pickups. They're passive, so there's no electronics in it, no batteries required. And this is one of the most versatile sounding basses you can get. It really is just gorgeous. So that's different. So I love those pickups.
And when would use that, John? Would use that?
I use that for the 60s type, if I'm doing 60s type of music, like Birds or I could use it on some Beatles stuff too, because it can flex enough. But I have a Hofner. I have Hofners for that as well. All the pickups, they do sound different. Dan Electro basses have what they call lipstick pickups, and they're just they're thin.
Oh chrome. Yeah, I've seen those. Those chrome bars. They look like it.
They sound amazing. Those pickups. So again, for me, I think of it as like paintbrushes and paint. A thick brush for the big broad strokes and fine brush for the little detail work, and that's how I kind of approach it.
Nice.
To have enough that I can kind of do that. So, yeah.
Wow. Now this is like a knucklehead question. What's the deal? I ask stupid questions. That's why I'm so successful at this. What's the deal with the chrome plate that's over a Fender bass? What? I know some guys take it off. Yep. Some guys leave it on. Is that just for aesthetics? Is that a dumb question? Is that a stupid question?
It's not a stupid question. I happen to have grown up without what they call the ashtrays. I mean, they're called ashtrays.
Oh, okay. All right.
So a lot of people don't use them. I one day watched Will Lee play, and Will Lee has always used ashtrays, and especially over the neck pickup. And I said, you know what? I want to try that. And I tell you, I tried it. And on Fender basses, sometimes you can't get your thumb properly, positioned. With that ashtray, it just sits perfectly. But there's a trade-off to that. You lose that much playing area, which is like right over the pickup. So it depends on what you want to do with it. I mean, so for me, this jazz bass, I don't have it on, but the P bass that's right next to it over here, that has them on. And so I do like how most of my other Fenders have the ashtrays on them. So,
all right. So you thought that was a dumb question. I got another one. When do you use a pick, or do you not ever use a pick when you play the bass?
A plectrum, yes.
A plectrum, yes. I know that word.
A plectrum, yes. Right. All of the early stuff, like all the Yes stuff, that was all pick. And there are a lot of other bands that do use pick. McCartney is pick. So it depends. Like, it is a little cleaner of an attack with, but I use both evenly, so it doesn't really matter to me. If it's a song that I think I could use a pick with, could like watch, like when I sit in with Almost Brothers, depending on the song that they do, I'll go and see whoever was playing bass on that particular song. If it's O'Teal, Burbage, or whoever it is, if he's playing a pick on that song, he got a sound, I'm going to use a pick on that song.
Right. Yep. You're gonna emulate the sound.
Yeah.
Right.
Try to get close. Yeah.
Yeah. So the last stupid question that I'm no props. This might be another stupid question that pops up. Fretless bass. When is that used? Have you used it? You like it? Don't like it? And by the way, let me just throw my 2 cents in, because I'm thinking about violins and cellos. It's like, that's amazing to me, the muscle memory of knowing where that freaking note is without any guide. Like.
Yep. No, I use a fretless with Mark Newman for his band on a couple of songs. I've got two. I have a Jocko fretless, and I also have a Rob Allen fretless bass, which is really a beautiful bass. And you have to have a pretty decent ear to play a fretless. And when I play with Mark, it's even that much more difficult, because I'm playing fretless and he's playing slide. So it's like two fretlesses going on at once. So you really have to dial it in. But I love to play fretless. I do. Yeah.
Right. All right. So I'm going to tell you how I met Mark. Okay. And you tell me how you met Mark.
Sure.
How's that? All right. Sure. So I was out. One of my early guests was a guy named Matt Marshak, international jazz guitarist, nicest guy in the world, humble as hell, and blows away. And I'm sitting there, and he's like, "Oh, this is Mark Newman." And I'm like, "Oh, hi." Like, I have no clue who he is. And then he told me who he played with, like Sam the Sham and the Pharaohs and this other stuff. I'm like, holy cow, and I'm bold. So I'm like, "Hey, would you like to be on my podcast?" He says, "Yeah, sure." And he was great. How did you guys connect? By the way, this is a cheap way to draw in all the Mark Newman fans into the podcast episode. So,
I'm really blessed to play with him. I had met him a few years ago, I guess at KJ Farrell's. He used to run open songwriters night, and I was with Mike Barry at that point, which I still play with him these days. But when I first met him, and then one night over at R.S. Jones, I was playing there with Mike doing a duo, and Mark and Naomi showed up, and we played Whitebird, and which was like the song, but boy, I did a great job hacking it up, because I really so it was fun. But after a while, we kind of met here and there. But what happened was there was going to be a double bill at KJ Farrell's with Almost Brothers and Sail & Shoes.
Okay.
So I was asked to fill in for Tom Hooker, who plays bass on Almost Brothers, which I accepted. And about, 3 weeks or so, maybe a month before the gig, Tom became available. So I was kind of bumped, which is, it happens.
Happens, right? Yeah.
So then Mark reaches out and he says, "Oh, by the way, they're going to be playing some," and so this actually, right. So I'll go down the road. So anyway, so he said, "Look, I'm doing this thing with Sail & Shoes. Would you mind, seeing if you could take a crack at that?" Okay. So total disclosure, I know you love Little Feat. I wasn't a big, huge Little Feat fan at that point in time.
Right.
So I figured Dixie Chicken, Willin', how can this possibly be? Right?
Fat Man in a Bathtub.
Yeah. And Mercenary Territory. I mean, all of these songs. And so we do a lot of stuff in Sail & Shoes off the Waiting for Columbus album. So I got the Waiting for Columbus album. And when I started to dig in, I went, "Oh, so this is what I signed on for." So, right. All right. So I got a month to learn this stuff. I'm like, "Oh, isn't that great?" So now I'm woodshedding my ass off. And then right, that, like a week and a half later, Mark calls me up again and he goes, "Hey, John, by the way, I got this thing of Still Partners coming up the week after with all my original stuff. Do you want to take a crack at that?" I said, "Well, my head's exploded already. How much worse can it?"
Right.
No, I learned all of his original stuff. So within that 5-week period, I learned the entire Waiting for Columbus album, except for Rock and Roll Doctor, which still eludes me to this point. It's just a killer song. And Day to Dog Races, I think that's another one that I don't think I'm ever going to get. That's just, it's ridiculous. I do want to learn to play it, because then I'm just going to say, now I can die. I mean, there's such a really hard song to play. So that was it. I did that, and then been with Mark ever since.
Nice. It's so interesting. Sometimes a musician needs that event that's coming up to have that goal to reach and conquer it. And it's
amazing.
Yeah, right.
It's an amazing thing what it can do for adrenaline and fear together. Oh boy, you can learn a lot of stuff that.
Oh yeah, fear motivates me in my marriage every day, which is and I say shit like that because I know my wife doesn't listen to the podcast. If she does, she'll be like, okay. Hey, John, this was really I'm tickled pink. This is a great exploration on your influences and on the bass and where you go with music. We would be remiss if we did not mention that you also play with Mike Nugent and the Blue Moon Band.
That's correct.
And we just did a Tiny Desk submission, and that'll be in the description below. Everybody, please comment, share this, so let's broaden our audience. And as I always say, we can't always account for. We can account for what we have in the bank, but what we own can't account for the time we have left. And John, the fact that you gave me more than an hour of time with you is a real blessing, and I appreciate it.
My pleasure. So,
all right, we'll see you playing around, so to speak, John.
You bet. And I just want to commend you again on the great job that you did on that Tiny Desk video. It was really, it was a lot of fun to see how it came out, and it really came out good. So,
fingers crossed for more exposure, right?
Right.
All right, everybody. We'll see you next time. Take care. All right,
pleasure. Bye, Steve. Have a great day. Bye-bye.
You too. Thank you for joining us today. I appreciate the time you spent with us. Please subscribe and comment, and visit us at gigdestiny.com. Till next time, be generous with your joy, keep your spirits high, and let the music take you on a journey. Be well. Peace.